everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you about this particular issue. I found it very fascinating myself, and I hope you enjoy it too. I thought I'd start off, before I delve into how Sunni and Shia bifurcated, I thought I'd give you first a little bit of background on it, just a little bit. I read this book here called The History of Islam, and I found it really fascinating. In it, it's got a short description of Mohammed. And I found this so cool because it's not just a cartoon guy with a turban on his head with a bomb. It's actually, you know, they had a lot of detail. Islam spread so quickly after it began, like within 40 years, it had expanded to North Africa to almost China. And so with that, they were interested in all the peculiarities of their leader, and so they did write them down, and the world does know about Muhammad and how his mission all began. Muhammad was sturdy and thick-set, of medium height, with heavy shoulders and a thick black curling beard. He was beetle-browed and had long black silken lashes, which he painted with kohl, fell over his eyes, which were very large, dark, and piercing, and often bloodshot. His skin was rosy, soft as a woman's, and he had a Roman nose, thin and aristocratic, with flaring nostrils. And he had dazzling white teeth, but was gap-toothed towards the end of his life. And when he laughed, which was often, he opened his mouth wide so that the gums were visible. And when he spoke, he turned his whole body, not only his head. It goes on to say what his likes and dislikes were. He hated dogs, lizards, people with yellow teeth, painters and sculptors, costly silks and embroideries, the smell of garlic and onions. And then it goes on like what he loved. Like he loved the children and honey and cucumbers, and it's all very bucolic, how much he loved very bucolic things. Another thing about Muhammad that most people don't know is that his first wife, she was a Christian. Her name was Khadija. He married her when he was 25 years old, and she was already 40. Her uncle was, or I think it was her uncle, maybe it was her cousin, he flexed between being Jewish and Christian, and both of them read the Gospels, and they instructed or taught Muhammad all about Christianity and Judaism from whence it came. So he became quite knowledgeable about those two monolithic religions. And it's probably from that influence that he decided that, you know, should there be an opportunity to be a monotheistic religion that would encompass the entire Arabian Peninsula, he probably thought that would be very cool, and he would like to have the respectability that those other greater religions had over the pagan religions that were innumerable around Mecca at the time when he grew up there. Another background thing I'd like to talk about was the reason why Islam spread so feverishly and so quickly was not necessarily because Islam had such a great message to send. It was because the Persians, who were the Sasanians and Zoroastrians, they were at the end of a 25-year conflict with the Byzantines. They fought for 25 years, and it was brutal, and it killed off all their young people. It just basically depleted all their shelves of ammunition. And seriously, when Islam came up from the peninsula, they didn't have any retaliation to offer. They just couldn't sustain their own institutions. And Islam came over and basically acquired leadership of all their administration and of their armies, and the Byzantines and the Romans, they just went weak and subsided back into their earlier or much earlier domains. And the Sasanian Persians were basically wiped out by Islam altogether. When Muhammad died, he died very quickly. Nobody was expecting it. He was born in 570 AD, and he died in 632. So he was 62 years old when he died. Nobody knows quite how, but he died in the lap of one of his favorite wives. And with dying so quickly, he didn't set up any kind of method for succession from, for leadership succession. That anybody else would lead his community, I suppose, was a foreign thought to him, even though he was already 62. And so, so basically, Islam had to decide upon itself exactly how it was going to manage the succession issue from caliph to caliph. And as far as the Sunni side goes, they did not do a very good job of doing that. In fact, a lot of this, except for the first four caliphs, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali, succession was basically the caliph trying to create a dynasty for him and his own family alone. And in my personal opinion, if Islam is going to be a personal dynasty of any one strong character, any one strong grandfather who had the ability to overthrow the previous government, then I think personally that dynasty ought to have been Muhammad's. Instead, Muhammad's grandchildren and children and offspring, they were poisoned and assassinated all continuously. They were constantly a threat because they constantly had the power to overthrow the Sunni line of succession. But anyhow, I'll get into that a little bit later. So when Muhammad died, he left behind him his four companions, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali. They were with Muhammad through thick and thin for the first 10 years of his ministry. They fought wars. In fact, one of his major enemies was the Umayyad family. They were basically the most potent, noble, aristocratic, richest family in Mecca, and they were his worst enemies there. And he fought 3 wars against those guys, and thousands of people on both sides, on the Meccan side and on the Medina side, they both died. Oh, I guess I should mention that. Muhammad moved to, in order to not be killed by the Meccans, they had to flee to Medina. In fact, the reason why they were able to flee to Medina and have a space in Medina and acquire some control in Medina, and I found this interesting, was because the first people from Medina that he met were Jewish. In fact, Medina had a lot of Jewish communities, and they thought Muhammad was perhaps the Jewish Messiah. And that's why at the beginning, when they didn't worship the Kaaba, they worshipped instead Jerusalem. But anyhow, that changed as a lot of the Jews became traitors. When he died, his first 4 companions were very close to him, and they sought amongst themselves the one who would be the greatest leader for Islam at that given time. Everyone except Ali. The people that became Shia, they believed that Islam should have been a dynasty of Muhammad's family. And it would have been Ali who would have had to have led that dynasty, and that's because Ali was married to Muhammad's daughter. And Ali was Muhammad's stepson as well. Ali was Muhammad's nephew. And they thought that would be the person. Ali was with Muhammad right from the beginning. He was like his very first convert. And Ali was closest to Muhammad in reflecting exactly what kind of government and response that Muhammad would have towards something. Ali tried to embody that closer than Abu Bakr or Uthman did, or Umar especially. One of these characters, his name is Umar, and he was a very violent man. He was ruthless. He tried to be fair, but he was nevertheless very ruthless. In fact, once when he went into Muhammad's tent, and Muhammad's 11 wives were all giggling, and Muhammad was laughing. He went in the tent, and all the wives of Muhammad scurried behind the curtain as fast as they could. And Umar said to Muhammad, he said, "Muhammad, why do your wives respect me more than they respect you?" And apparently Muhammad's response to that was, "Why, Umar, even if the devil alone were to meet you in the street, he would scurry down an alley as fast as he could out of fright." So anyhow, that was Umar, and he was well known as being. You would not want Umar as an enemy. In fact, Umar first came into Islam in an attempt to kill Mohammed. He heard that Mohammed was talking to his sister, trying to convert her, and he was hell-bent on going and killing them both. And he decided he didn't want to. He wanted to hear more of Muhammad's poetry. And because actually Umar, for all his ruthlessness, he really liked literature and poetry. And he just loved Muhammad's poetry, and he began to love Muhammad's philosophy. And he was one of his earlier converts, but it was a lot like Paul going to kill the Christians before he converted after falling off his horse. That was Umar, and he was a very important guy to have on your side. So Abu Bakr became the first Caliph. What happened there was Umar and Uthman and a bunch of people from Medina, they got together because Muhammad had died, and they wanted a new leader instantly. And meanwhile, Ali was out looking after the body of Muhammad, preparing it for burial with Muhammad's family. So during this vote, which had to happen instantly while Ali was conveniently away, they elected Abu Bakr to be the leader. And Ali was very upset. It took Ali 6 months before he pledged allegiance to Abu Bakr's leader. He did not like it one bit. He felt like they were treating him very unfairly, and that he should have been there for the vote and to have the opportunity to be included within the delegates. So Abu Bakr became the leader. Now, almost immediately from Abu Bakr becoming leader, the tribes around Medina and Mecca, they had capitulated their allegiance. When Muhammad was alive, they pledged allegiance to Muhammad, and they pledged allegiance to Islam. But when Muhammad died, they reverted back to their own pagan ways. And that really upset Umar and Abu Bakr, because it really it was a domino effect, depleting them of fellow warriors and fellow people to spread the word of Islam. And so they decided that they were committing acts of treason, and that if they didn't re-allege to Islam, then they were going to be killed. So there were these wars perpetuated against all the tribal people, and a lot of the early Muslims died. In fact, Islam at first was memorized. Everybody had memorized the Quran, and so many memorizers were lost during these wars that that's when they decided that they had to get the Quran written down in paper in books as fast as possible, because they were starting as their soldiers were memorizers, and they were dying and trying to fight these wars of apostasy, they called them. So that was Abu Bakr. When he was the leader, Umar was very much by his side in every way, and that's why I kind of think it was kind of a proxy leadership, kind of like a Putin thing, where I think that Umar felt like he was a leader even though he wasn't acknowledged so yet. So when Abu Bakr died, he designated Umar to be the leader. There was no vote, and apparently in pagan societies in Arabia, it was common that when one leader would die, they would vote for the next leader. It wasn't designated necessarily. The dynasties were not necessarily the case. Leaders were voted sometimes, and so it was considered a little bit un-Arabic, I suppose, to designate somebody, especially if it's somebody not in the family, as a leader. But anyhow, Abu Bakr said, okay, Umar's the leader, and everybody accepted that. Well, that's because everybody was scared of the guy. That's anyhow what I think. So Umar was very frightening. He was leader for 10 years, and under his command, Islam spread it spread to North Africa. It spread through the Persian societies. It spread far east and far west, and they really pushed back the Romans and the Byzantines into a small place. But he was considered fair. When he died, he found it not possible in himself to designate a leader. And so he chose 6 men that would become he chose 6 men that would be choose between them who the next leader would be. And so 2 of those men were this Uthman guy and Ali, and then there were 4 others, which I don't know who they were. And so out of this 6, Uthman got elected. Now, everybody, I've got this little chart here. It's on the 2nd page of your notes, so if you have problems following it up here, you can read it on your little piece of paper at the bottom. It's very much what I have written up here, so if you can't see up here, it's more convenient to read, you can look there. Uthman was an Umayyad. He was one of that family that were the noble, aristocrat, rich, powerful people of Mecca. But he was one of the early companions of Muhammad, and actually if it wasn't for Uthman, Islam may not have become this powerful enough seed to rise above the earth and blossom. And that's because Uthman was instrumental in having the Meccans come over and pledge allegiance to Muhammad. It was a very dicey situation when they returned to Mecca and wanted to have the right to circle and worship towards the Kaaba and be with the black stone. But Uthman was a terrible leader. He was really, really bad. He gave all his favorite roles to he gave all his favorite roles to his family, to the Umayyad family. He gave governorship of Egypt to a fellow that Muhammad would have preferred to have killed. Muhammad had wanted the leader of Egypt to be executed, and it was because Uthman intervened, because he was a friend, that Muhammad refrained from executing this guy, and instead Uthman makes him the governor of Egypt. Now, what's that? And he gave the governorship of Persia to a guy that had actually spat in Muhammad's face. And so, he was, I'll just hold on here. It's just in this book, I couldn't remember it. The Umayyads were Uthman put the Umayyads in control of the imperial treasury, of the police, of the annual pilgrimage, of the inspectorate, of the armed forces all over Arabia and beyond. Umayyad influence pervaded all branches of government. Nearly all the wealth of the empire was concentrated in their hands. And then basically it goes on about this guy who spat in his face and the guy that Muhammad wanted to execute for whatever reason that was. So all I wanted to emphasize was that the Umayyads, through Uthman, the Umayyads basically gained control of the entire Islamic empire, and they were Muhammad's worst enemies. But Muhammad, when the Umayyads, when they came over to Islam, Muhammad wanted to give them gift baskets because they were like the prodigal son. Muhammad refrained from having any, he did not want any violence to be perpetuated against them. He did not want them discriminated because of their former acts of battle. I mean, they had 3 wars and thousands of people died. It was bad. I'm not going into it here, but it was bad. And but Muhammad seemed to have forgiven them for everything. So, some could say that maybe Muhammad wouldn't have minded if the Umayyads became in control of everything, but personally I think that anybody here or anybody anywhere would think that if there was going to be a dynasty made of any one family, maybe Muhammad would have preferred it have been his. That's all I think, rather than the Umayyads, because the Umayyads, well, anyhow, I'll go into a little bit more on them later. Another thing that happened between Abu Bakr, Umar, and Uthman was the writing of the Quran. Now, like I said, during Abu Bakr and Umar's time, they were gathering the Quran from everywhere. It was written on stones, it was written on pieces of bark, it was written on pieces of outcrop, it was written on palm leaves. people memorized it. People had little bits of Syria's everywhere. Lots of people memorized it. And so that's they gathered all of those and actually put them on paper and bound them. One of the copies that was bound ended up in the hands of Umar's daughter. And she had her own copy. She was also one of Muhammad's wives. And that was the Quran that Umar read from. And so that was the Quran that Umar read from. And it's the one that we have today, almost. When Uthman became in power, he was responsible for creating the Quran in one package and sending it out to all the places that the empire had grown to. And like I said, the reason why, and Uthman also gathered, before he sent it out, he gathered the Qurans from all the outlying areas. He gathered the Quran from Morocco to China. And that's because he could see that the empire was so vast that he had to have control over it was written in different people's languages, different kinds of meanings were being developed for the word in Arabic. There was no consistency, and he wanted one strong form. And so he took the Quran, even the Quran from Muhammad's family, he took, and he destroyed them all in one burning pile, all these handwritten first editions. And he sent out a Quran that, according to the book here, one of Muhammad's own secretaries says was a giant falsification. And it was a falsification because Uthman was an Umayyad, and he had dreams of the Umayyads having essential power in this new religion. And the fact is that the Quran was probably packed full of denigrations against the Umayyad family because they were his arch enemies. And they were probably through the Quran, and that's what this is what the secretary was saying, is that Uthman deleted all references to the Umayyads. And if you take the Umayyads out of the history of Islam, then basically there's no wars. There's no wars. There's nothing. The Quran, I've got a copy of the Quran here, and so the Quran that I have there on the table is exactly the same Quran that Uthman released in whenever it was. You have it on your sheet. I don't have it on mine. Whenever Uthman lived, and I forget when he lived. 650. Oh, okay. It's probably right there. Yeah. Okay. Say about 650. It was put out 20 years, in its form, within 20 years of Muhammad's death, and that's the Quran that you have there. You can pass it around if you want to look at it. It's just, and it's I read it, as you can see with all the pink notes. I read it, and it's just a really boring instrument. I read the Old Testament. The Old Testament is mean and nasty and brutal and detailed and honest, like this. And the Quran is of all those things about like this. The only thing that's violent in it is that it keeps telling infidels that they're going to burn in fires of hell. And it's something that he repeats and repeats and repeats, and you get the message. But it's written so softly, and the book is so soft that, anyway, it was really interesting to read, but a little boring. So Uthman he gave all the power to his family. Now, what happened is that a lot of people in all these territories that were now under Uthman's control, and Uthman never spoke to anybody but Umayyads. Like, if nobody except Umayyad could have his presence and have anything decided upon. So there was a lot of active rebellion happening beneath the Islamic society. And when Uthman he was living in Medina, when he was being he was under threat by everybody, and it was active threat. And so Ali here, he sent two of his sons, and two other important guys sent two of their sons, and they were sent out to basically play bodyguard to Uthman so that he wouldn't get killed, because it would be a terrible thing if he was to get killed, I suppose. And while they were watching him, apparently this guy named Mohammed ibn Abu Bakr, he stuck into the house and he stabbed Uthman to death, and while the blood poured over his Quran that he was reading at the time. Now you would think that with all the poisonings and all the assassinations that had happened everywhere, I mean, that you would think that people would have become inured and accustomed to this. But the Umayyads, who were everywhere, they thought it was horrible, and they were really angry, and they blamed Ali for Uthman's death. And so they felt this kind of right to avenge Uthman's death, and that's why this guy down here, Muawiyah, who was governor of Syria, it's why he got a huge army of people, of 50,000 people, and they went to fight Ali, who is now the Caliph, with his 50,000 people. So here we have a governor of Syria who's an Umayyad, and we have Ali, and they're fighting. And their fight is really even. They both take casualties and on both sides really evenly. And there was a point when Ali was starting to win this fight. And at that point, Muawiyah, he had his guys stick their Qurans on the top of their spears, and basically surrender. And one of the things that Mohammed said is if your enemy desists fighting, then you also desist fighting and you try and come to an agreement. And this is something that Mohammed believed, and Ali knew this, and this was the kind of philosophy that Ali had, and also his sons Hassan and Hussein had. Muhammad had found an aversion to having Muslims fighting Muslims, and so Ali did not want to do anything that Muhammad would not like, and so there was an aversion there. So instead, Ali and Muawiyah sat there in the surrendering table, and they came to an agreement. They would go to arbitration as to who was responsible for Uthman's death, and also, Uthman's death. So anyhow, they went to this arbitration, and the arbitration said Ali and Muawiyah should be at the same political level. In other words, Ali should take a governorship of somewhere and then fight or whatever. And Ali thought that was wrong. He should not have been penalized because he was not responsible for Uthman's death. He said he should not be penalized. So he prepared to go back to war again with Muawiyah. Well, on his way back to war, he got stabbed with a poison blade by one of the rebels that thought that Ali, when Muawiyah had surrendered, this rebel thought that Muawiyah should have that Ali should have chopped off Muawiyah's head, and everybody who was in his power positions surrounding him, and basically reduced that threat to something that was non-threatening, which is, like I said, is not what Ali did. And so he was considered a wimpy knee weakling, and so they didn't want him around anymore. So this rebel came and assassinated Ali. So when in Ali then, well, I'm not going to that yet. Still, Shiaism hasn't quite developed yet. They were waiting to see what would happen. They wanted to see if maybe through the caliphate, Ali and his two sons would finally come to a stable situation where it became a dynasty within the caliphate. So Shia Islam hasn't really developed yet. But Ali died, and his eldest son Hassan became the next caliph. Now Hassan was caliph for 6 months. He surrendered. He resigned from the position because Muawiyah wanted to fight him if he didn't resign. And Hassan was following the philosophy of his father and of his grandfather. And he says, well, I don't want to have Muslims die because of me, so I'll go off to pasture. But what kind of deal are you going to make me? And so Muawiyah said that he would give him a large pension and basically allow his younger brother Hussein to become the caliph after he dies. And so Hassan thought that was okay. So Hassan went to a castle outside of Medina where he had apparently, before he died, he had 100 wives and 200 temporary wives living in this castle there. So I guess he had a nice life for the next 10 years that he'd live. Yeah, busy. So anyhow, so that was Hassan. So Muawiyah became the next caliph, and he was really the first. He made the caliphate. These four guys up here, they all died penniless. They were all about Islam, all trying to do the most they can for Islam, and they all died penniless, taking their inspiration from Abu Bakr and Mohammed himself, who sought not to make themselves wildly too high above the common man. But Muawiyah here, the first Umayyad, he thought he should be as opulent as the Byzantine emperors, and they had palaces and lots of silks and embroideries and all sorts of things that Muhammad would have not have liked. One would think that they would know that, but anyhow, they had forgotten, I suppose. So Muawiyah was ruthless, but unlike Uthman, Muawiyah put good people in government. He brought up the Christians and the Jews who were his strongest advisors. And that's another thing, another misconception a lot of people have. Well, I don't know the real story here, but anyhow, apparently, when Islam poured out of Arabia, they came out of Arabia because they were seeking resources. They wanted to have the water, and they wanted to have the ability to grow things. And so they sought more territory that was more livable. And so the Arabs, who had all adopted Islam, they came up to the Middle East, and they went into Syria and Iraq and Egypt and North Africa, and they played the landlords. They played the top administrators of all these different governments. And basically, to become a Muslim, you had to jump through some hoops that not everybody could jump through. And it would be the Muslims that would have the first class status, and they had all the access to the best jobs, and versus the second class status. Also, Muslims paid less tax. If you were a Jew or you were a Christian, you paid a lot more tax, and that tax money went into the coffers. What was I talking about? Anyhow, when Islam came out, it conquested. It was like it demanded allegiance of a territory, people of a territory, but it didn't necessarily demand conversion. The thing is that the Muslims don't really care if there's 2 or 2 million people in any jurisdiction being Islamic. What they care about is whether those people are forced to live through by Islamic law, and that Sharia can be there, and that any Muslims there can have that as an option in government. They want Sharia to be in charge of the government. They don't care necessarily how many Muslims are beneath them. At least that's at the beginning. And after the people in these territories saw that they got better rights and had more cash and whatnot, they converted the Jews, and the Christians slowly converted to Islam. And that's how it first started. The Muslims had authority, all these people, and they became the bosses, and life was good. And so when Muawiyah died, he did not give the caliphate to Hussein. It did not go to Hussein. It went to his own son Yazid instead. And so this is where Hussein, who's living down in Mecca, he says to himself, what am I supposed to do? I think he felt he was obligated to fight Yazid for the leadership of Islam. He left Mecca with 100 women and children, and 200 men, and they went to Iraq. They walked to Iraq. And in Iraq, Hussein expected large armies to be ready to fight on his side. Well, something happened in the communication. People were assassinated, notes were intercepted, and other notes sent, and Hussein got the wrong message. And what he found when he got into Iraq near Basra, I think, what he found there was a 4,000 man army that was waiting for him, and they were Yazid's army. And that was at Karbala, a place called, I think everybody here has heard of Karbala. And they had the Persians certainly
they have all these things, they whip themselves and stuff like that. Because at Karbala, basically Yazid assassinated Hussein's family because Hussein refused to give allegiance to Yazid. He just absolutely refused, and he was considered a treason, committing treason, and so they thought he gets the death penalty. And so they killed a whole pile of Muhammad's family in Karbala because they had women and children there. And basically every man in that army they got executed. And so Karbala is kind of a day of infamy for Sunni Islam. That's what the Shia think, and it's a day that they spend a lot of time on in Persia and in Syria. No, Persia and Iraq, sorry. So Yazid firmly became the Caliph, and it went down. The Umayyads spent the next 100 years as the caliphs, and lived opulent lives and killed. And you know what? It was after Hussein's death that Shia Islam developed. They said, we give up. We can see now that there's not going to be any dynasty for Muhammad out of this caliphate. So they decided that the people that are in Syria and Iraq and Iran, they decided that they were going to start a new religion called Shia. And Ali became the first imam, Hassan became the second imam, and Hussein became the third imam. And then there was a 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th imam. And these are the 12 rightly selected imams or something. These are the imams that, there's 12 imams. Ahmadinejad is waiting for the return of the 12th imam because he didn't just get assassinated by poison or splayed. He basically disappeared. And so Ahmadinejad awaits the return of the 12th imam, and 85% of Iran are considered 12ers, and they believe that. A small percentage of Muslims in Iran and Iraq are 7ers, and basically they became like Ismaili. And the Agha Khan is considered the 49th imam, descended from the 7th imam, if that makes any sense to anybody. So these are the rightly guided imams. And these are the rightly guided caliphs. These other ones down here are not considered so. So life went on. The next dynasty after the Umayyads was the Abbasid dynasty. I'm not going a whole lot into that. I just wanted to point out this one character. His name is Muhammad, and he was an Abbasid. And he saw this rift between Sunni and Shia, and he sought to mend it because his mother was a Persian. And so at the time when Muhammad lived, he died in 833, he was in love with this Al-Rida, who was the 8th imam. And they did everything together. They went shooting together. They spent all their weekends together. They were in love with one another almost. And Muhammad promised that Al-Rida would get the caliphate after himself, but that just wasn't to happen. Al-Rida got poisoned, and everybody blamed Muhammad. And, well, I can only imagine that with the huge Abbasid influence, I mean, they were massive as well, just like the Umayyads. And maybe somebody else murdered him, I don't know, but Muhammad had a terrible time. He was in despair after Al-Rida died, and he was blamed for it. But if you get blamed for the bad stuff, it's good to get praised for the good stuff. And Muhammad did a lot of fantastic things. In fact, when Europe was in the Dark Ages and everybody was brutal as hell, Muhammad was there setting up libraries and places of research, and he had all the Greek and Roman and Babylonian books. He had them all translated into Arabic, and it was because of those Arabic writings that the wealth of knowledge of mathematics and science and astronomy and geography and masonry and everything, it all came from the Arabic Empire because all the original records were destroyed and nobody could read from them. So basically all that information from the Renaissance, it all came from Arabic. And it was all because of Mammon that happened. Another thing about Mammon, and this is the most fantastic thing, is that he did not think that the Quran was uncreated. Right now, people have to believe, otherwise it's blasphemous, that the Quran was written at the same time that God came to be. It was written at the same time as God. It was written on like 12 golden plaques or something in the heavens, and it was brought down to earth in pure form, and there's absolutely no error in the Quran, and you cannot dispute with the Quran because it's like disputing with God, and it's considered blasphemous. And Mammon said, that's crap. He says he loved the Greek age of reason. He thought it was the Greek age of reason. He thought that you had to be reasonable, otherwise there would be no real essential authority, because you can't really force people to believe something that's not reasonable to believe. And so he actually set up tribunals, and he penalized people and put them in jail for not alleging that the Quran was actually created by man, and it could possibly have some fault to it. And fault, I'm sure it did have, because like I said, at the very beginning, Abu Bakr and Umar were strong influences on it, and both of these guys, they beat their wives. And Umar was a total misogynist of the most 18th type, and I can only imagine that they had a lot of influence on the Quran. In fact, I'm sure that Muhammad probably didn't appreciate a lot of things in the Quran, but I do believe that the burning in hellfire part is probably what Muhammad wanted people to believe. Otherwise, they had no reason to come over to Islam, did they? So, but all I'm saying is that some of the things that are in the Quran, I think that these guys possibly had a strong influence on. So that was Mammon. He was heroic, as far as I'm concerned. He was heroic. And actually, Mammon, because up till then, him, which is like 833, the caliphs had a lot of potency. They could make a lot of decisions. And it was when Mammon was trying to bring these people to tribunals over this essential little piece of business, that the Sharia people, all the scholars, they did not like what was happening, and that's when Sharia began, is when they wanted to take the authority from the caliph and put it in the hands of the scholarship, the clerics or whatever. He wanted the clerics deciding, because apparently, according to Mohammed, a decision made by a group of people cannot be wrong, and so Mammon didn't have a chance of getting his way unless the scholars themselves wanted it, and they didn't. So the last caliph, it was all in a row, and the last caliph was the Ottoman caliph. I don't have his name here, I think it's Abdullah, but anyhow, he was the last caliph, and the caliphate ended with the Ottoman Empire in 1924. And so that's late. There's been no caliph since. Like I said, this Malik Aga Khan is the 49th Imam, descended from the 7th Imam, descendant of Muhammad, and so is the current king of Jordan. He's descended from Ali as well. I'm not sure which guy here or where from, but he's the 43rd in a row. And the king of Jordan, and both the Aga Khan and the king of Jordan are very Western-looking leaders, and Jordan has unfounded peace accords with Israel and gets along with them really well. Well, considering. So anyhow, that's my little presentation. I don't know, and I'm sure there's lots of questions, and I don't know everything. I can try and answer your questions, or if I can't answer, maybe somebody else can answer. And so that's it. Thank you.